Nova Scotia is considered the education destination of Canada. With 10 universities and an extensive community college system, you can find diverse post-secondary options in all corners of the province. People from around the world make up the student population here, and one of such is Mutinta Hamalala, who was born in Zimbabwe but raised in Angola. Mutinta is currently studying psychology at Dalhousie University here in Halifax. Also joining us from Sydney, Nova Scotia is Omon Yerobe, a student of Cape Breton University who was originally from Africa, Nigeria precisely. Welcome to the show, guys, and good to have you here too.
Great to be here.
Omon, how are you doing?
Great to be here. Oh, really good, thank you. Really good.
Awesome.
Really good to be here.
I'll start with you, Mutinta.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about yourself and the experience you've had as a student of African descent so far, the journey.
Okay. So I was born in Zimbabwe,
Right.
and then moved to Angola when I was 1 year old and lived there until I was 18. And then I made my journey all the way here to Canada, Halifax, to attend Dalhousie University. I initially came to just, study psychology. But as my first year and second year went along, I found a liking for sustainability and also gender women's studies.
Right.
My experience with my studies and just like interacting with the environment, the complete different environment, complete change, started off very rocky. I think I struggled in the beginning because it was a big, not cultural shock per se, because I did grow up in an English speaking school environment. But it was more just having to re-identify myself within, myself, because I had no family here. No, I didn't have any friends here when I first came, so having to find my own self in a completely new environment. I think that was one of the biggest challenges.
Let's turn to Omon. Omon, we'd like to know a little bit about you too. What are you studying? What are you doing? And what has the experience been like for you?
Right, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Promise. So really, with the background in public health from back home, Nigeria, and a master's in demography and social statistics, I came in to study a post-baccalaureate in healthcare management. And really, it's really been quite an interesting ride, for me. And I think that really what I've found, and I did highlight this on one of my posts recently, is that the principles are really the same, really. I find that whereas of course there will be cultural shock in terms of lifestyle changes and all that, the principles of hard work, integrity, empathy, those principles still apply, because where everything is concerned, we are still all human beings, and my experiences generally, those principles have helped me. It's been a good experience so far.
Right. Can you just let us in on insight to what students are going through at your own side of the universities? And we realize that sometimes this comes with a lot of pressure from the studies themselves and cultural differences and all that. So what is it like?
Over here for us, the culture shock can be a lot, and the culture shock will affect each individual differently, where everyone's experiences are peculiar to them, and I find that in many cases, because I relate with a number of people, find that some people have different experiences with regards to culture shock. Some people have found that it's easier to relate with people on campus. Some people have taken to their shelves. They've gone back into hiding, not really engaging with a lot of folks. They're maybe looking for support. Sometimes it looks like it's as though academics feels the entire essence of the student life. There's less social activities. There are less opportunities to actually interact in a more relaxed environment, although the school tries, but where the majority of the demographic is actually within 18 to 25, you really expect that that's a vibrant community, right? But then in a very quiet city, it's quite dicey.
Right. And to you, Mutinta, I understand that beyond studies, you have some other things that you do. How are you able to balance your academics and your personal life in the scheme of things, given that some people don't even have the opportunity of doing more than just the academic activities? How are you able to balance this, and how can people learn from your experience?
I think so. Initially, it was by force. It was for my own mental health. I feel like
Right.
at some point I was too focused on school, where I would not prioritize even friendships, and like I would limit like talking to family because I was so like, oh, I need to pass my classes. But that in itself was so isolating to the point where it was further deteriorating my mental health.
Right.
So I made the effort to, when I register for my classes, for example, at least like in my case, I have the option of like choosing, there's not just one class. I can take multiple classes. I cater to like my schedule. I always pick at least one day in the week that I don't have class. That's like, at least for me, because I know weekends sometimes I'm just doing schoolwork. So at least one day of the week. I used to pick Wednesdays, but this year it's Friday that I don't have classes. So if I have to do all my classes on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that's fine, because I have Friday off. And in that time, so initially it would start like, okay, I would have Friday off, and that's my me day. Once I started working, which was in third year, so last year I started working, I was able to cater. So with my work schedule, so I'd get my work schedule and then cater to like my next semester. I would pick and choose, like, obviously my degree comes first, but I would pick around my work schedule, and also be very like communicate with my work people. Like, obviously I'm a student first. I'm not a work. As much as I would love to work, I'm a student first, and that is like, my visa is dependent on my studies.
Right.
Even if it's just 2 hours, for example, I'm a behavioral therapist. My clients, I don't work with them every day. My experience, I would say, it's different and has enabled me to be able to like balance out the work and school.
There's one thing that keeps coming up, that is peculiar for students, especially of African descent, and that thing is racism. And I understand that it still exists in a systemic manner. What has your experience been around there too, and how have you dealt with it? How have you called it out and spoken up for it?
Yeah. So growing up in a predominantly Black country, so as much as yes, I went into international school, predominantly Black country, I never really had to acknowledge my Blackness, right? Everyone is the same. We're all the same. I come to Halifax, I come to Canada, and in my classes, sitting, class of 500 students, there's only two Black people, me and some other student. And so everything, like, my identity is now my race is now part of my being. So I talk, first thing people notice is my skin, like I'm different. So initially, like, I thought when I coming here, I would experience like racism, like really, like this would, I've never experienced it, but this would be my first time to experience it. Luckily, I never have experienced the negative, the like verbal abuse type racism, but having I worked in Bridgewater and New Glasgow. These are two towns in Nova Scotia. I came across like a type of racism, passive, I think it was like, the passive or discreet racism, where older white men would sexualize me, right? I've heard of people like fetishizing over, like, for example, Asian women. I think that's something that's spoken about a lot. But me as a, like, young Black woman, and being like treated like an object, like a sexual object, I feel like that in itself, as much as it wasn't the racism that we were constantly talking about, I felt like that was my first like experience. I know I have heard like people say, oh, I had a racist encounter, and they have had a racist encounter. I agree with them. I just personally, my experience with racism here in Nova Scotia has just been different, and also like to this day I'm still trying to understand like how did it impact me, and then also how do you even prevent that from happening to someone else?
Yeah, you probably have mentioned that you have friends who have actually experienced the wrong one, and how did they call this out? How was it addressed? Are there groups within schools or government departments that help to address this issue?
So within school, I think, school support system, like support groups and school counseling, they have facilities to address those kind of issues. They do give like briefings, for example, in like in orientation, they do talk about how to like deal with racism. I think sometimes we brush it off because we're like, oh, that wouldn't apply to us. But when it happens to you, that's when you're like, oh, now I need the support. School counseling is a good place to go. There's also like school peer groups. Sometimes just sharing your experience with another person, you find that you relate. Like, you're not the only person dealing with it. So I attended one peer group once because we were talking about interpersonal relationships, just struggling with setting boundaries, or just if something happens to you that you don't like, how to communicate that. So I would say utilize like your school, especially if you're in a university setting, utilize your school resources, like the
Yeah.
mental health resources, and also teachers. And your teachers and your peers are actually there for you. I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of times we try to isolate ourselves and think
Yeah.
we're the only person experiencing this.
Yeah.
But talking about it, being vulnerable, yeah.
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 You mentioned something very interesting, and that's mental health. We'll come to that.
Yeah.
But let for now, let me go to Omon. Omon, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that students are facing in your area, perhaps the entire Nova Scotia, students of African descent, and how can they address these challenges that they face?
Yes, so thank you very much for that. That question is really very key. I think that biggest challenges really are economic challenges, and challenges that maybe it appears that the municipality is not ready for or didn't prepare for, right? Where they are just trying to actually now adapt to those realities of migration, which has also now birthed issues around housing and issues around income equality or income level as a whole, right? Where students who are in school paying international student fees also need jobs to support themselves. And yes, at the federal level, with the recent upgrades in the work hour limit, that has helped. But then what are the opportunities that currently exist in Sydney, Cape Breton particularly? I think that the government has released statements where they're actually trying to facilitate more housing units, but that will take time, and I think we need more short-term solutions. Definitely the school is helping to address it, but key issues for me that students face, like myself, will be housing, and number two will be jobs, access to opportunities, really,
Yeah, and staying out there in Cape Breton, for some who live around here, will understand that it's a little bit far out there, remote if you like. Do you have groups, associations that are of African origin that you can leverage too? Sometimes when you need some help or counseling of some sort. Do you have such groups, and how are you able to approach them?
Right. So I think, to the best of my knowledge, I know that within CBU, there is a community for Africans and Caribbeans where the community organizes some events. I've been to a number of them, right? Maybe not, definitely get some social support from there and maybe some emotional balance, because just because it allows you to communicate and relate. But also where I think, a number of Africans in Cape Breton find support would be in the religious settings, just because Africa being a relatively religious, continent. So moving here, a number of people find that community. So the first community that the people meet here would be, the churches and the mosques, right? And so that's key in finding support. But so far, I think more can be done, regarding support for Africans or African students who are in Sydney here. That also includes NSCC.
Right. Okay. That's interesting analysis there, Martin. That I said I was going to come back to you on this issue of mental health of students. Trust me, I didn't know it existed to this extent, right? And I mean, it struck me. Tell me a little bit about the work you're doing on that with your friends or group of friends.
Okay, I'm kind of like promoting vulnerability, and openness, and just basically my whole agenda is that humans are social beings.
Right.
But yet, every time when we go through things, we isolate ourselves, and we tend to, isolate and just internalize, and we try to treat ourselves like we're the only person going through something. And sometimes the way of dealing with something is through support. Like, support systems are such an important thing. Right. But our tendencies to isolate just completely trumps the whole humans are social beings. Like, literally, sometimes the way you can help yourself is by including one other, if it's not many people, just one other person. So on my Instagram, I have started being open about my own experiences, just like my medical experiences, or just personal, something personal that's happened. And I'll post on my story relatable content. It's not just about me. I'll use TikToks, for example, a TikTok that is addressing a deep topic. And yes, I will put it in a funny nature, but I get many messages from people, oh my goodness, I relate to this, oh my goodness. And all these messages I'm getting in comments on my private, I'm realizing a lot of us are going through the exact same thing.
Wow.
Different fonts, but exact same thing. But we don't know it because we don't communicate it. And a lot of times we think we're the only ones, because we haven't communicated, we think we're the only ones. We just try to deal with things ourselves. For some people, they are able to pull themselves out of it. But for a lot of people, and a really alarming amount of people, will slip into depression. For some, that depression ends up, they kill themselves, Like, it's such a bad, very concerning thing. So I've just been, like, my biggest thing, like, vulnerability. Vulnerability is such a taboo. It's a very taboo thing, like, to express and be your authentic self and say, I'm actually struggling with this. I feel like sometimes admitting you're struggling is a big thing that we, naturally, like, humans tend to avoid. But within vulnerability, you can find people that are, one, going through what you're going through, or have gone through it and, like, helped themselves or had support, and they're able to help you.
So what actually leads to this situation for students, for instance? Would you say it's the pressure from the academic activities or from the environment? What exactly is it that...
It really depends on the person. But what I've noticed, for example, the people within Nova Scotia, a lot of them are, for example, students of African descent or students of, like, ethnic backgrounds that are not related to the backgrounds here. It's the change in mentality, change in tradition, change in culture, change in environment. So it's a lot of things, but just that complete change and having to then adulthood is very isolating, can be very isolating. You've come from, being, like, spoon-fed by your parents, or just, like, constantly surrounded by your parents telling you what to do, and then all of a sudden you're put into a world where you have to do everything by yourself. So I think for a lot of people, what causes these, like, issues with mental health is, like, unfamiliar environment. And whether it be culturally, religiously, socially, there's a lot of differences. Just the being thrown into a new environment, I feel like,
That's quite touching. And Omon, earlier on you touched on this as well, and I'd like to know, what is the severity, the significance of the impact of this situation?
With what Tinta has said, Tinta's, about unfamiliar environments. And it's very key, because human beings were not created to live alone. Human beings were created to associate. We're created to connect. It's important that we recognize that as a need, not even a want, as a human need. And so when we come into a new environment, we need to connect. So because then on two sides, so I'll address one factor. I think, one will be that, of course, there's the loneliness part, right? There's loneliness. The reality is real. It's obvious that you come into a new environment. If you're like me, you have no family here. You are the family that people have here. You are just you, and you're coming in new. Also, you're lucky if you have someone who is also your color, and then sometimes even beyond color is also that you also sometimes need someone of a similar ideology, not necessarily about color. So you're looking for your tribe and you want to connect. It's not about color now, it's about similar ideologies. You want to connect on that note. If you feel alone, you start sinking onto yourself and you don't reach out to people to connect and to find what's out there. And also that need, if it's not met, an unmet need will lead to something like that. And also I think that sometimes, it's important that we understand that, for example, for some people who commit suicide, and that's the extreme of mental health, issues. It's that it is cluelessness. If we don't have hope, we don't have a clue what the next day holds for us in any aspect of our lives. It could be in a relationship, it could be in life, it could be in finances. If we don't have hope of what the next level is, if we don't see any future, if we don't see any hope, we become clueless. We become hopeless, and it's a cycle, really. And also the mental resilience of people, and also people comparing themselves with the reality they see on social media, and social media being a very advertised based, this is where they show you the best of everything. If you then compare your momentary self to the best experiences that people are posting, you will be deluded. But there's a lot of that delusion happening now. Because people don't show you their down moments, they only show you their best moments, and we are comparing apples to mangoes, whereas we should compare apples to apples.
Yeah, you mentioned
So
the
that
future
is
there.
the pressure.
Yeah, Omon, sorry to butt in there. You talked about future, and I guess it's one of the things I wanted to ask you and Matinda, who is with me here in the studio. So looking ahead, what exactly is your future aspirations? I know you're a student currently, but you definitely want to work at some point. So, what are those plans you're looking forward to as we gradually wrap up on this interview?
Right. So for me, I'll go first so that Tinta could sort of summarize, and so that I give it the last. Okay. So, but for me, it would be that really looking forward to what Canada has. Canada has shown to be a country and a community that rewards hard work, that rewards diversity. I'm looking forward to accessing all those opportunities in a free and fair system, to get in there, make changes the best I can, do the best that I can, also enjoy moments where I can. And that's really it for me. That's it.
Thank you, and I'll come to you, Matinda. So, you sound like someone who has big dreams, and
Yeah.
you want to achieve all of them.
Yeah.
And of course, you're catching on some of the opportunities there.
Yeah.
What exactly are these your plans and aspirations as you come to the end of your career? I mean, your academics here. Yeah.
I think like what Oman said is so important, to utilize the resources that we have here.
Yeah.
Because I think it's too easy to take them for granted.
Yeah.
Especially like in comparison to back home.
Mm-hmm.
The mental health that is spoken about here, the understanding that people have here about it is so much greater, and like I want to use that.
Yeah.
So even with the jobs I do, using it to empower the newer generation. I work with children for a reason. I'm working with children for a reason, so that they can grow up and continue, it's a generational impact. But also to be able to take it home. I know, yes, like even trying to deal with my grandparents, sometimes their mindset is so stuck in their ways that some things will just won't change. But to continue to enrich the lives of others, whether it be through psychology, whether it be through, just like fundraising. I'd like to do that as charities and everything. A podcast, just simply talking. My Instagram posting about like my experiences and how I've overcome them. So just enriching the lives of others. And I feel like this podcast is just like the first step, and it's even made me feel like my goals are attainable in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
but
love it.
Again, before I let you guys go, I still want to ask the last question on the final note. What would be your advice to students who are struggling currently, struggling with mental health, struggling with their academics? Omon, I'd like you to go on that one before we move to Matinda.
Right. So for me, the biggest advice is one that I give myself. First, when you come into the community, find a support system. Whatever that support system looks like for you. Sometimes many schools have the support system. I know that Kebeto University does have support systems. Also, wherever you want to find support. There's support available. Also, understand that when you come in, the principles that apply back home also apply here. Principles like hard work, empathy, diligence, consistency, they apply here. Apply those principles here, and you'll also be at the top of your game. Yeah.
Awesome. And what is that your final word for students who are struggling?
Like what Oman said, the support. But then also, I would say, don't use adulthood as an excuse to isolate yourself. Adulthood is isolating already. Don't use it as an excuse. If yourself, like I know I personally struggled with people not reaching out to me, and their excuse was adulthood, and I'd be like, okay. But sometimes if you, for example, want to hold on to someone, if there's someone that you, for example, when you're in your lowest moment, there is someone you think of that you want to talk to, but you don't talk to them, reach out. Do that, put that effort in and reach out yourself and tell them I'm not doing well, or just, reach out and hold on to the people you like, I always say, hold on to the people you think are home. Not just like like we have a lot of friends, acquaintances, but the people who you find are home, hold on to them with your dear life, as if like adulthood depends on it, because I'm telling you need a support system. And I would say so don't let adulthood isolate you.
It's beautiful.
Awesome.
Couldn't have been a better place to leave it. I want to thank you both for coming on the show and sharing your experience and challenges as students of African descent here. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having
Thank you for
us.
having me.
And that was Mutinta Malala and Omon Yoruba. They have been sharing their experiences as students of African descent here in Nova Scotia. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button and hit the notification bell. Till I come your way again, I am Promise Okoy. Bye for now.